Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. This is a Ukraine war news update, first part thereof for the 2nd of August 2025. There's a lot going on. I'll try and make this as concise as possible, but Ukraine have been very busy last night, as I'm sure many of you will already know, because my time difference is making my news updates come out later than I otherwise would like. So we have the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before 1,000, not 10,000, that'd be pretty mad. 1,010 personnel lost, that's above 1,000. So that's good for the Ukrainians with 0 tanks, 1 troop carrying AFV, a single MLRS, and then 38 artillery systems, that is above the daily average, so that's good. 130 vehicles and fuel tanks, that's particularly high in that category over the last 24 hours. So interesting there. That's the main source of attack vehicles that the Russians are using. They would fall under vehicles and fuel tanks. So motorbikes, quads, golf buggies, and all sorts. Let's go on and look at Andrew Perpetua's loss list for the 1st of August. So he's well up and on it these days at the moment, which is fantastic. Thank you, Andrew, for all your hard work. You can see that Ukrainians have lost, well, actually, if you take out the pink comms equipment entries, then actually it's about the same as the Russians, possibly actually losing less than the Russians. Fewer pieces of kit. The Russians are padding out their losses with ATVs and civilian vehicles, which is a trend that we have seen quite a lot over the last few weeks and months. Now we have, I don't know what a Humo XL is, but they have lost one of those. That is an electronic warfare piece of kit. I would normally look that up, but I've got so much to get through. What do we have here on the Ukrainian list? Few howitzers of various types and pieces of artillery that have been damaged. There we have a single tank, T-64, destroyed. We've got a captured Bradley. Haven't seen Bradleys on the list too frequently recently. Infantry fighting vehicles as well. 4 out of the 5 of them irretrievably lost there. We have a single M113 in the APC category, a single MRAP destroyed, 5 infantry mobility vehicles irretrievably lost, and then you're down to your civilian vehicles and a decoy, N777 decoy, a howitzer decoy there. So interesting. Okay, so nothing too significant for the Ukrainians there. We have, in terms of traditional combat assets, we have more artillery, I guess, for the Russians here. A few tanks, and then really not much else. Out of the tanks, you've got 4 tanks there, and what do we have? 2 of them are track garden sheds. One is with a mine roller. Um, yeah, shows you that they are using tanks, I think, predominantly not as tanks. In one case, it's being used as a mine clearance vehicle, which is pretty standard. But then the other 2, track gun shows. I saw one video just now of, in fact, I'll see if I can find that for you, because I've never seen anything quite like it, really. It was, yeah, this vehicle here, that sand crawler tank, just incredible. It is like watching. It really is like watching Mad Max. So yeah, they really are producing these alternate versions of tanks. Quite a clip there. So quite a lot of artillery, as I mentioned, D20s, D30s, a few musters there, and then outside of the tanks, we're really on to trucks, ATVs, a lot of ATVs again, motorcycles, quads, and then civilian vehicles, quite a few of them. And I think that underwrites the idea that the Russians are using more of these unarmored vehicles to do their attacks. And lo and behold, we get a piece of evidence to support this. So footage showing 200 motorcycles collected by Russian volunteers for upcoming assault operations by the Russian forces there. Another fundraisers wrapped up, says this source, 200 of these assembled by hand. Wow. So that is I think that's a worry, because I think the motorcycles actually are conveying something of an advantage. They are using them quite effectively, and yeah, pretty incredible to see all of those motorbikes racked and stacked and ready to go for the Russians. Right. A Russian sabotage and reconnaissance group, a DRG, has been spotted calmly moving through the eastern part of Pokrovsk, Certainly a worry. Pokrovsk is, I mean, I saw one analysis from Julian Röpke, take it with a pinch of salt, that 1% of Pokrovsk is under Russian control, but they are certainly operating it within Pokrovsk, and I would think that it was more than that. This whole area to the south there seems to be under Russian control here. So I'm not sure that eastern part of Pokrovsk is what's being discussed here, because that looks very much like the southwestern part. But anyway, what do I know about compass points? Right, Ukrainian rocket artillery is currently, so this was last night, well, yesterday afternoon, 3 o'clock. I don't know actually, because my time is so different here. So that could be 8 o'clock at night. No, it could be 10 o'clock at night local time, depending on whether that is from when I was in the UK or over here. So, anyway, Ukrainian rocket artillery is currently launching a massive strike using Gimler's rockets fired from M142 HIMARS systems, targeting Russian military facilities in the occupied Zaporizhia and Kherson regions. Loud explosions are being heard in Melitopol and Tokmak. According to Russian military bloggers, Ukrainian forces are bombing Russian troop positions, and casualties are reportedly high. So, the first thing to note is that the Ukrainians were very active yesterday with more localized Gimlers attacks, guided multiple launch rocket systems, firing their precision guided munitions into occupied territories. Add that onto some very successful drone strikes last night, and even potentially sabotage operations. I'm not sure. We'll get onto that later. The Ukrainians have probably had a pretty good last 24 hours, if I'm to be totally honest. Now, I didn't show you one yesterday, but there's another image of aviation attack on a bridge that took out a bridge. It wasn't this one, but this is in the Bryansk region. An unknown strike seriously damaged a bridge near the village of Rudnya Tsarta, which is, if you care to note, there. So the Ukrainians appear to be trying to take out logistics behind the Russian front line inside their own country there with aviation strikes, not for the first time, but yeah, good news for the Ukrainians there. Now, going back to these Gimler strikes, explosion in Melitopol, well, no, sorry, not Gimler strikes. So this is when I was talking about sabotage as well, playing a part. So explosion in Melitopol, 5 Kadyrovsky destroyed. So these are the Kadyrovites from Chechnya, from Ramzan Kadyrov. According to the GUR, a minibus with soldiers of Akhmat unit inside exploded. As a result of the detonation, all 5 passengers died. 2 invaders were in the car, and they, in a car, were also injured. And a mobile electronic warfare complex was destroyed. So that is something that is coming out from the GUR in this case. So some successful activity taking place all around here. There's a video to accompany this. As you can see in a second, it's a bit of an explosion. There you go. There you go in the background there. So, bit of an explosion taking out some Russian personnel and equipment there. And I presume that's sabotage because you've got someone recording it here rather than a Gimlin strike. Then this, I didn't quite know where to put this because I don't know how this happened. And I suggest it's, well, no, I initially thought it was sabotage, but it could have been a strike with drones, to be perfectly honest. If I think about it, you know, a gas pipeline is an easy target for drones. I mean, it's a pretty big um, bit of kit, goes a long way. You've got quite a bit of option for taking out. So explosions hit in the Central Asia Center gas pipeline in Russia's Volgograd region, knocking it out of service. The pipeline, owned by Gazprom, carries gas from Turkmenistan via Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan to Russia and supplies several military facilities. So there's quite a lot of talk about this. This is a translation from a Russian post. I think explosions occurred in Russia on the Central Asia Center gas pipeline. It failed, as in the pipeline failed, not the attempts at taking it out. Sources informed Babel about this on August the 2nd. the Central Asia Center gas pipeline, part of the Gazprom gas pipeline system that transports natural gas from Turkmenistan, etc., like we've heard, failed in the Volgograd region. This main line supplies energy to a number of military facilities: Demikovsky machine building plant, a MiG aircraft company, Magnum K ammunition manufacturing plant, and others. Gas transportation through this pipeline has been suspended indefinitely. So this is a serious uh, success, I think. As you can see here, explosions disable the gas pipeline in Russia's Volgograd region. Yeah, and it operates to all of those significant military, industrial, I would say, entities, I guess. Right, Russia on fire. We have who knows what was behind this, but this is pretty much the aftermath of a huge blaze which closed off quite a wide part of the city of Chelyabinsk today, as in yesterday, says Tim White. It's strange as no media specifically identified what burned. One report said it was probably a warehouse storing alcohol. No cause was given either. Stuff like this, you're thinking, well, is that anything to do with the military? You know, what was going on there? Anything to do with the war? Have no idea. But anyway, what was apparently a pretty significant blaze took place in Chelyabinsk. Right, now we're going to go on to distance strikes here, and a pretty significant day or night, I should say, for the Russians as they were under the Kosher for the Ukrainians, depending on which way you look at it. First of all, we'll start with what the Russians did. 53 drones were fired into Ukraine last night, so that's lower than we have seen. For the moment, at least, Kiev is specifying that the number of high-speed jet drones, in this instance, 8, uh, all 8 of those were destroyed, along with 37 regular, making an overall success rate of 85%. Russia hit 5 locations. I don't have too much detail on what was hit specifically. We do understand, though, that in Druzhkivka, outside of a couple of things we're going to talk about, Druzhkivka is one of them. So, just to give you a sense of where that is, if you have Konstantinivka, Chasiv Yar, Bakhmut, Konstantinivka, and then it goes up to Druzhkivka, and then you've got Kramatorsk and Slovyansk. So you've got a semicircle of settlements or towns, cities, even fairly close to the front line. This is one of them, and a recruitment center. It's at least the eighth, possibly more. Actually, to be honest, now that has been hit by the Russians recently, and to the point where they have adapted and are starting. The Ukrainians are starting to use mobile recruitment centers, but Russia claims to have struck a recruitment center in Druzhkivka in a Ukrainian-controlled Donetsk region. Here it is from ground level. Um, so a few minutes ago, the city of Druzhkivka, Donetsk, Russians struck a market. So the Russians claim they hit a recruitment center. Here, the Ukrainians claim they've hit a market at a time when it was crowded with people. According to local media, around 10 explosions were heard. Preliminary reports indicate a high number of casualties. That was how long ago? So that was some hours back. Probably. Yes, almost 7 hours ago, six and a half. Russian forces struck the center of Slovyansk, hitting a Slovyansk hotel. So again, one of those settlements I was just referencing. The building is seriously damaged, and at least one person has been reported injured. So there you go. Some more residential damage done to the Ukrainians there. And here we have markings of downed Russian drones on a Ukrainian Mi-24V helicopter. Helicopters are very, I think, they're a very good way of taking down drones. They can fly alongside them, wait till it's over a safe place, and then shoot them down. The problem is they just don't have enough helicopters to cover the amount of the sky that's needed. Um, and of course, it comes with its own risks as well. But I think they've been fairly successful, the Ukrainians, in using helicopters to take down Shahed drones. So, not too much more information about the Russian use of Shahed drones last night. But my goodness, there's a lot of this going on today, last night, this morning, in terms of Russian facilities being hit, and it looks like oil facilities are back on the agenda. Ukraine appear to be emboldened in what they're striking. Again, I don't know if there's some agreement with the US now to hammer the Russians' ability to make money out of hydrocarbons. There's talk about secondary sanctions on India and secondary sanctions on China too, and anyone who is supplying or being supplied by Russia. Um, I think we speculated that Ukraine has not been striking oil facilities because they have been put under pressure by the Americans not to, for one reason or another. And I'm guessing that that has now been lifted. So here, Pekka Kaliniemi says, in the last 24 hours, Ukraine has hit more targets with drones than OSINT groups can analyze. And indeed, here's an OSINT group, Tatargami, saying, I'm happy to report that Ukrainian strikes are moving faster than our team's geolocation and analysis can keep up with. We're taking a day off to catch our breath, then we'll dive into a thorough review of the latest impacts. Thanks for your patience and support. Tatargami had said just now 5 hours ago, Penza military plant, Elektropribor, preliminary damage assessment in the early hours of August the 2nd. Ukrainian drones struck multiple targets in Russia, including refineries and military industrial sites. Here's what's known so far about the strike at Elektropribor. We verified that the strike is by geolocating both the recordings POV and the impact site. The location matches satellite imagery, confirming social media reports that Penza's Elektropribor was targeted by a drone. And they give the impact coordinates there. It supplies a range of electronic products to both the Russian military and law enforcement, automated control systems, encrypted communications equipment, radar tech, and more. Construction of the targeted facility began around 2018. The building was reported as a new assembly facility specifically dedicated to the production in the local news. Earlier reports estimated Russia's investment in the project around 300 million rubles, about $4 to $5 million at the time. If the strike successfully penetrated, previous attacks suggest a decent likelihood that the assembly's industrial equipment was damaged or set on fire, potentially requiring repairs or replacement. High-resolution imagery will later confirm or refute this assumption. So far this week appears to be more successful in hitting targets. Previously, our team documented many strikes that resulted in little to no damage, but this week clearly stands out with a higher number of impactful hits. So that's not just last night, but the last few nights, it seems. I think this is what we've been waiting for, and I'm hoping that you're going to start seeing ballistic missiles and cruise missiles produced and used by the Ukrainians having an effect. If they aren't already, it's just tough to know whether you hear so many things like you're going to see these soon or they have been tested. So they've definitely used them, their own ballistic and cruise missiles, particularly ballistic missiles. And I think cruise missiles, you're wondering whether they're kind of missile drone hybrids. Um, so they've kind of tested them, which means they've tested them in on the Russians. And they may be using them already just on the quiet. I don't know, but certainly a more successful few days for the Ukrainians recently. Russian monitoring channels are currently in panic. This was Visioner last night, saying that Ukrainian drones are attacking the Crimean Bridge and other Russian targets near the Sea of Azov. So Crimea was under attack. Actually, I think it was Feodosia. We'll come on to that a little bit later, but let's just get a bit of a summary. So Special Kherson Cat says, today a lot of targets across Russia were attacked. This thread will collect information about all the struck sites overnight based on available data. Oil refineries in Ryazan and Novokuybyshevsk. A radar base hit in Feodosia. Primorsko-Akhtarsk airfield, that's a Shahed launch site, famously launched the Shahed Zen, that was hit. Some good firms data there. Elektropribor military plant in Penza. Rail logistics infrastructure in Rostov region. So there might be another refinery hit as well. Could be a third one on top of that. I think 3 have been hit. Anyway, Novokuybyshevsk oil refinery has a capacity of 7.9 million tons. AVT 11 unit with a refining capacity of 6 million tons was hit, causing a big column of fire to emerge. FP1 long-range kamikaze drones were used in the attack. So that is a successful strike on the oil refinery, as you can see there. A significant effect. In fact, I think you can hear drones.
Ебать. Пизда нахуй.
You can still hear drones in that. So that's possibly the start of what took place, and there could be more to follow. Anyway, Uh, let's just pause that and go on. So, Ryazan oil refinery is located over 470 kilometers from Ukraine's state border and contributes around 6.1% of Russia's total oil refining capacity, up to 17 million tons annually, making it one of the country's four largest refineries. A strike which is carried out by the 14th Regular Army, what's that, the 14th UAS Regiment, sparked a fire that caused big columns of smoke to appear. However, it remains unclear which specific units of the refinery were hit, but there's at least two big smoking fires there. And then we have Primorsko-Akhtarsk airfield. It's a Shahed launch site. SBU drones targeted a military airfield in Primorsko-Akhtarsk in Krasnodar Krai, where Shahed drones are used to attack Ukraine. They are stored there and launched. A fire broke out near the airfield following the strike. However, the full extent of the damage and the specific results of the attack remain unclear at this stage. So, if we look at the imagery here, there's launchers, air defense launchers around the airfield, as you would expect, and certainly to the south of the airfield, some places were hit. So maybe some launchers to the south might have been involved in the destruction there, and then part of the military airfield infrastructure, and then further to the south, this could be where they're storing drones. I don't know. I'm speculating here, but some serious fires taking place there, as you can see from the firm's data. SBU drones also attacked the Elektropribor plant in Penza, facility involved in, as we heard, producing equipment for Russia's military industrial complex, including systems for aviation, armored vehicles, naval vessels, and space tech. Smoke was observed in the area following the explosions, but the exact impact and level of damage have not yet been confirmed. And then the Likaya Zamchalovo traction substation in Russia's Rostov region was targeted by strike drones. It supports one of the main rail routes used for military logistics towards occupied Ukrainian territory. A fire broke out at the site. According to NASA firm's data, the facility located near Uglerodovsky powers a key electric rail line used by Russian forces. And then Feodosia, Russian radar base located, was targeted overnight. The base also reportedly used by Russian Nebo U and L 96L6 radar station. So the Nebo radar, that's a big radar array. That's a pretty valuable bit of kit. So quite a lot taking place last night in a number of different places. As Russia has proved that it doesn't want to negotiate a ceasefire, says Visegrad, Ukraine has started striking its oil refineries. Last night, Ukrainian suicide drones struck 3 Russian oil refineries in Samara, Ryazan, and Penza. I don't know if Penza was a refinery, though. I'm a bit confused because I hear some claims that 3 refineries have been hit, and then claims that 2 refineries and that military industrial complex in Penza. The videos of a huge explosion is from the Samara uh, oil refinery. So we could be getting back to the same sort of activity that we saw some time back, where Ukraine were relentlessly taking out the Russian oil refineries and infrastructure. So same sort of claim here from NOR reports, talking about this one at the Novokuybyshevsk refinery. The unit handles a crucial first stage purifying crude oil and separating it into fractions like fuel oil, kerosene, diesel, and gasoline. That's looking fairly hot there. And yeah, so Tim White's talking about this. I'm just trying to see if he's got anything else. There's slightly different imagery in some of his videos here. Yeah, the Elektropribor. Then that's a refinery in Ryazan, Sloviansk. Yeah, no, we're coming on to that in a wee while. Yeah, so um, Ukraine also attacked Crimea in the early hours. Haven't been able to verify this. Said to be in Feodosia. Pro-Ukraine Crimean wind channel speculates a radar station at the golf balls may have been hit. So there's big domes. Um, so that is Tim White's appraisal. What else? Ryazan oil refinery at night. You can see the nighttime strikes there from Max 25 and a slightly zoomed in one. What else do we have? Strikes in Lipetsk and explosions in Feodosia as well. And there you go. That's what Tim White said about Feodosia. So I've already looked at that. Yeah, so that's the kind of golf ball dome that might well have taken one for the team there. Following last night's strikes, there are apparent reportedly, says Vision, has significant consequences in occupied Crimea. Monitoring groups and OSINT sources report a fire at the military unit of Russia's air defense radar unit. The facility contains 4 radar domes, each housing radio technical stations beneath. One of the domes is the size of a 9-story building, while the other 3 are smaller. Um, so they could have had success in damaging one of those uh, bits of infrastructure. Ukrainian Defense Force continue the topic of knocking out the Russian enemy's strategic railway logistics infrastructure, says this source of a Gesti. Don't I've not used them before. On the night of August 1st to 2nd, the Ukrainian Defense Forces attacked the Likaya Zamchalovo traction current substation in the Rostov region, which was reported earlier, as I said. But here is a satellite image of what was supposedly struck. Um, so there was some targeted attacks, and of course, yeah, here we go, looking at the well, actually, that's the Shahid launching site, but that's just the air airstrip, if you like. Further south there were um, further things on fire. Um, yeah, so Ukraine's general staff and SBU confirm a number of successful strikes on military targets inside Russia. Strike on the airport Krasnodar region has been confirmed. Ukraine says it took out warehouses containing Shahid attack drones launched from there. In addition, last night's blast in Voronezh region was on the Anna oil depot, according to Ukraine. So there's your third one. There's your third. It might not have been Penza, it might be the Anna oil depot. So a lot has been happening in Russia overnight. Um, yeah, so that's no report saying sort of similarly. Okay, now moving on to other bits and pieces, and quite a lot in this section. So, first of all, we're going to go to a bit of a shame here for Ukraine. Unpleasant scenes in Vinnytsia took place last night. A large crowd, mainly women, had gathered outside the city stadium. Some say they tried to storm it. It's believed up to 100 men were brought in the morning. It's assumed they were held for not registering with or evading the military. This is one of those problems where it can look really bad, but if people are breaking the law, like for example, and I've said this before, if you are a thief, a burglar, um, a murderer, whatever, any kind of criminal, then you would expect that if you were spotted on the streets and you had evaded custody, that you'd be whipped off the streets and put in a meat wagon and then taken to the police station, right? If you have evaded being called up for the armed forces, if your name is up and you have not done what you are supposed to have done, you have broken the law. And so, therefore, these people are taken off the streets. Like, you don't drive up to them and say, "Oh, are you John Smith?" And they say, "Yeah." You say, "Well, you're supposed to be signing up for the army," and they go, "Yeah, sorry about that. I forgot to." And then it's not like they're going to say, "Oh, can you make sure you turn up tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.?" Yeah, yeah, of course I will, of course I will. And then they drive off. So they're obviously going to take them off the streets. But then that looks really bad from a PR point of view. But it's obviously how you manage being in a war. You've been invaded. You need your people to defend the country. It's a legal requirement. And if you evade it, you are breaking the law. Uh, but yeah, 100. I believe that 100 men were brought in the morning from Vinnytsia region, but it looks like their wives and families were not were not fans of this. So protesters demand the release of draftees in Vinnytsia, and they break into the detention facilities, says the Kiev Independent. Apparently, it was all sorted out eventually. Police were involved, but yeah, I'm sure we'll hear more about that going forward. Right, there have been some incredible scenes and claims of lack of fresh water in occupied Donetsk Oblast, and there have been these tankers full of water going to provide people in their homes with water. Apparently, in the city of Donetsk, they only have fresh water one in every 3 days, something like that. All these different claims coming out. Then today we're hearing that the occupied authorities are watering the flower beds. So in occupied Donetsk, scarce water is being used to water flower beds near the so-called DPR government buildings. So typically make the government buildings look all right, but don't care about the people. Local residents also report that most of the water delivered to tankers is being used to service the private homes of the so-called government. So who knew that would happen? I guess most people would guess that would be the case. And now we're on to a another water-related thread and issue: the lack of Russian motor transport to deliver mass intensive potable water is a major logistical weakness of the 2025 Russian army in Ukraine, says Trentelenko, with reference to a Chris Owicki thread. As bad as the situation is, says Chris Owicki, with the water supplies for the civilians of the Donbass region, it's worse for the Russian army. A video shared by the Russian war blogger, a Russian war blogger, shows Russian soldiers drinking from muddy ponds. Pioneer of the reserve writes, the situation with water on the front line remains consistently difficult. The guys have to collect water from puddles, swamps, lakes, and then filter it. There's videos from Oleksivka in a Pokrovsk direction. So it is bad news for the Russians in terms of both civilian access to clean water and military access to clean water. HIV is ravaging the Russian army. Infections are up 2,000% since the start of the war. According to a new report by the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, the spike in infections is linked to two main factors: unprotected sex and drug use. The Kremlin's policies are making the situation worse. Under the guise of promoting traditional values, authorities are cracking down on organizations focused on HIV prevention and education. For a third year in a row, Russia ranks among the top 5 countries with the highest number of new HIV infections, behind only South Africa, Mozambique, Nigeria, and India. That's not good news. Then I almost reported on this yesterday, but there seems to be even more of an issue. So the initial thread I was going to say was, but it was a long one from Chris Owicki. 2 battalion commanders have gone missing from the notorious Donetsk-based Russian army regiment within 5 days. Russian war bloggers are concerned that the 2 have been murdered on the orders of their superiors and denounced the regiment's lawlessness. So that was the original thread. That's just the first one of it. I'm going to, just not go through the details of that and then add some more to what you don't already know. So Chris Owicki adds then today with a further thread: investigations into suspected crimes in the Russian 5th Brigade, including the recent disappearances of and possible murder of 2 officers, are reportedly hampered by an unexpected problem. Investigators themselves are disappearing and possibly are being murdered. Many accusations have been made against the brigade senior officers, including drug trafficking, robberies, looting, extortion, salary theft, trade in fuel, and humanitarian aid, following the disappearance of the battalion commander Yuri Burakov. An official investigation is said to have now been opened into Burakov's disappearance after he was summoned to meet his superiors. Though previous attempts to investigate the Fifth Brigade's affairs have apparently not produced any results. Anastasia Kashevarova writes, a comprehensive investigation is underway into the 95th Regiment, 5th Brigade. Military prosecutors, military investigators, and counterintelligence are working. I'm not giving any information yet. I do not want to interfere or put pressure on the investigation. War blogger Rostislav DDD comments, judging by the fact that the battalion commanders of the 95th Regiment have not yet been found, he or they were eliminated immediately after being summoned to the regiment headquarters. The reasons are in principle obvious. It's all about money, and the 5th Meat Brigade gives a lot of money. So the commissions that work there are at several levels will find nothing again. And then another called Golikov suggests a darker scenario for the lack of results. I just had a short conversation with a person from a certain structure of strange affairs in connection with the situation of the 5th Brigade, which was outlined by Peter Lundström. According to my interlocutor, in terms of the volume of reports and statements about illegal actions and crimes received by the competent authorities, the units and formations of the 51st Guards Combined Arms Army, former 1st Army Corps of the Donetsk People's Republic, as well as the new military formations of the Moscow Military District, including the infamous 6th Motorized Rifle Division, are in the lead. This is for general understanding, but that's not all. The nuance is that the work on the defendants is extremely complicated, so complicated that I'm conveying this almost verbatim. It happens that operatives from Moscow leave for the territory of the Donetsk People's Republic and do not return. In a similar vein, Maxim Kalashnikov comments, fighting the disintegration of units is sometimes dangerous. Individual operatives cannot cope and often do not return. My conviction is that we need, as in 1919 to 1923, CHON, Special Purpose Units, a Bolshevik armed internal security force. It was they who in 1920 surrounded and disarmed those units of the 1st Cavalry that had begun to loot, and they removed the guilty for the tribunal. Anastasia Kashevarova has a similar recommendation. We need SMERSH. So that's a World War II era internal military counterintelligence. There are claims that they actually do exist in certain forms, but there have been calls for them more because the Russian armed forces, they're just rife with complete corruption. And here's another example, and a pretty horrific one, where commanders are being disappeared, and then people investigating the disappearance of the commanders are themselves being disappeared. Right, another Crypto Wiki thread, but a very quick one. Black Sea Fleet commanders have reportedly imposed severe restrictions on their subordinates in retaliation for leaks portraying senior officers as involved in what? I wonder what? Oh, corruption schemes. They are said to be keeping unseaworthy vessels in service to corruptly divert repair funds. It was reported in June that several Black Sea Fleet vessels regarded as wrecks are undergoing what amount to indefinite repair programs, which senior officers are exploiting to steal from the repair budget. This is basically what's happened with the aircraft carrier Kuznetsov. So, one particular Telegram channel named the commander of the 4th Separate Submarine Brigade, Captain First Rank Dmitry Skarga, as a key figure in the scheme. Now, the channel reports Skarga is cracking down on his subordinates to deter any further leaks. According to the channel, in order to prevent further leaks of information, FSB officers from Moscow were involved who were conducting preventative measures with the brigade personnel. However, due to the disclosure of his part of the corruption schemes, Skarga began a real campaign of pressure on his subordinates. Unjustified penalties have become more frequent. Servicemen are threatened with transfer to the Special Military Operations Zone, and legitimate leave was cancelled under false pretext. The situation is becoming absurd and is getting worse. Sailors and officers deliberately wait for the commander to go on holiday or a business trip before submitting reports to his deputy. Otherwise, there is a high risk that the offended Skarga will refuse to on principle. There are rumors of his transfer in September, so the situation is getting worse every day. Just more examples of corruption in the armed forces there. Right, we're going to move on to Azerbaijan now. And they have been really trolling, I think, Russia. Azerbaijan has shamelessly humiliated the Russians. Baku reacted sharply to the use of Armenian names for Azerbaijani cities by Russian propagandists of TASS. The Azerbaijani Foreign Ministry, in an official statement, demanded that the toponym Stepan it be corrected, otherwise Baku would call Russian cities by their historical names. The Azerbaijani state agency Azatak has even published a list of new names for Russian cities that will be used in their publications. So Kaliningrad, that exclave, will be called Königsberg again. Orenburg is Orenbor. Volgograd is Sarisu. Grozny is Solza Gala, and others. The TASS propagandists were frightened and quickly removed Stepanakert from the headlines. So the Russians are trying to troll like the Azerbaijanis by the use of Armenian names for Azerbaijani cities, and then Azerbaijan said, "Well, two can play that game." So no, this is all good news. You want no love lost between these two nations. You want Russia to lose purchase in the region. Now, this is from Matthew Whitaker, the US ambassador to NATO. Very strong rhetoric here on Newsmax. Russia will have neither friends nor trading partners once Trump imposes devastating sanctions. He argues that if the Kremlin refuses a ceasefire, Putin will be left without funds to continue the war. This could really reflect a change in approach from the US in many different dimensions. For example, the aforementioned strikes on Russian oil facilities. It could really be that the US has changed position, or not the US, the Trump administration has changed position on Russia and Ukraine. Because at the end of the day, and this is useful to remember, this is the times that US presidents have tried to restart relations with Russia and have failed. So H.W. Bush did it in 1992, failed. Bill Clinton did it in 1994, failed. Bush 2, 2001, failed. Obama, 2009, failed. Trump, 2016, failed. Biden, 2021, failed. Trump, 2025, failed. Same mistake made over and over. At some point, you've got to realize that you can't do business with Russia. Russia appears to be always going to be Russia, especially when you've got Putin at the helm. It's not going to happen. So, let's support Ukraine as much as we possibly can, knowing exactly who Russia really are. Okay, Russia has stated that UAE banks have begun to massively block accounts of Russian companies. So the report is UAE banks have begun to block those accounts due to, one would presume, sanctions or secondary sanctions pressure from the US. That's a Moscow Times reporting that. Just a bit of economic data there. And according to the New York Times, the US Senate has proposed an initiative to allocate $54.6 billion to Ukraine over the next 2 years using frozen Russian assets. According to the senator's proposal, the remaining funds should come from revenue generated by selling American weapons to European allies. Additionally, the bill envisions a legally binding agreement between the US and Ukraine regarding the use of Ukraine's natural resources. Proceeds from their sale will be used to reimburse the Pentagon for expenses related to arming Ukraine. The proposal also includes significantly expanded powers for the US president to transfer weapons to Ukraine without prior congressional approval. Specifically, the authorization cap would increase from the current $100 million to $6 billion annually in 2026 and 2027. There's also talk, I'm going to try and fit in a military aid update video because there is talk about a lot of funding. I'm not going to say being released because I think it's all about sales again, and it might be sort of linked to this. But the US could be prepared to. There's going to be funding, a new style of funding between NATO and the US so that NATO and European nations can buy things effectively from the US. It isn't so much, I don't think any of this is about the US helping Ukraine off its own back, as in like donating anything to Ukraine. This is all about selling stuff and either having it funded by Europeans or funded by frozen Russian assets or funded by the minerals that are coming out of Ukraine that they have as part of the minerals agreement. But anyway, all of it is at least moving in the right direction towards a greater support for Ukraine. Now, I'm probably going to do a separate video on this, and I talked about this previously. So the British Armed Forces are entering into drone flying competitions. And they're doing that to improve their skills in drone warfare, in trying to future proof the armed forces in the UK. And it's got to a point where the now I am the master, where Ukrainian soldiers are training British soldiers on how to use drones and how to use them maybe in the battlefield and all sorts. There's a really interesting 5-minute segment on Channel 4 News that I want to play to you because I think it's just interesting. But I'll probably do that at a later time. You can go and check this out, though. It'll be linked in the description below. So that's enough for me.
Mini map.
Oops, there you go. That's enough for me. I really appreciate your support. Thank you for putting up with me being in a different place and different schedule and everything. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.